It's time to reveal how to play the Enchanted role-playing game. I'm Will from Enchanted ESL and I'm super excited to share this revolutionary new method with you. It's taken a while to get to this point and it's still at an early stage, so bear in mind that what I explain here is not the final rules and setup of the game. I'm currently going through playtesting with a bunch of different classes, and over the course of this year I'll refine it until I've got the complete version. Saying that, the core of the game will not change drastically, so most of what's in this video will make it to the final product. And if you don't know what the Enchanted role-playing game is, then I strongly suggest you watch the first video in this series. In that I explain the whole idea of role-playing games as opposed to just normal roleplay, and how you can use them in your English classes. Plus you'll learn the design principles and why I decided to create my own game. So that video is up there and down in the description, so go watch it now and come back to this one later. Alright, before we get into the nitty-gritty, we need to really think about what a role-playing game is. You may already have some background in role-playing games, or maybe nothing at all. Hopefully you've done some roleplay scenarios in your classes, so you know that the point is students take on a role and act and speak within that role. It's putting yourself in the shoes of another person, and in a role-playing game we take that a step further and we tell a story with the characters that we create. The characters may have conflicting goals or a shared ambition, or just be hanging out. Kids do this kind of roleplay all the time. However, to turn it into a proper game where everybody is satisfied, we need to all agree on what the world is like and what the boundaries are. That's where rules come in. You see, not everything our characters do should succeed. Sometimes there's failure, and that's great because it means we choose our actions wisely. So we need to have some kind of rule set for determining what succeeds and what doesn't. Plus, we need to establish what the setting is. If one player thinks they're in a magical fantasy land and the other person is in the modern world, then they're not really going to play very well together. So it's vital to have shared expectations about the world we're in. These two things, the rules and the setting, are mostly governed by one special player, which is the Game Master. In this case, it's going to be you, the teacher. The Game Master doesn't really play a character. They referee the rules, they describe the world, and they act as all of the non-player characters in the game. Obviously those non-player characters are much less important than the player characters themselves. The game flows as a dialogue between this Game Master, GM, and the players, and that's where the story unfurls. The GM describes the situation that the players are in, they say what actions they want to say, and the GM determines the outcome of those actions, usually with some dice rolling. The GM then describes the resulting situation, the characters say what they want to do next, and then you resolve it once again, and this continues. The Game Master is super important and it's more complicated, so that's why you, the teacher, are going to do it and your students are going to be the player characters. There are some cases where you may want a really confident and advanced student to be the Game Master, but I'd probably avoid it. As a result, the terms teacher and Game Master are going to be completely interchangeable, as are student and player. Oh, and just to be absolutely clear, all of the players are on the same team. They are working together. This is not a competitive game. And while the GM is in control of the rules, they are also not working against the players directly. They want to put challenges in their way, but ultimately everyone wants the player characters to win. What you're doing is telling a story together. Someone has to create barriers and difficulties for the characters so that the story is even more awesome. But if you treat it like a conflict, then it's not going to go as well. Now there's a couple more terms we need to define. The first is session. I'm going to be using session to talk about the time in a lesson where you play the game. These are single units of time. Maybe once a week you play for half an hour. So one session is that one half-an-hour block. Some may play for less, some may play for more, and it doesn't really matter. As long as your sessions are at least 10 or 15 minutes, then you can get enough done. The next term is a mystery. This starts with a hook to get things going, an investigation phase, and then a resolution when the players figure out the answer, or not. Mysteries in this game will probably take about 2 to 3 hours. Depending on your students, they might go a bit faster or a bit slower. So for some groups that might be 1 or 2 sessions, and for others it might be a whole term's worth of sessions. And if you're playing in the long term, you can play a bunch of mysteries one after another that create a long campaign. Now the term mystery implies lots of detective work. I find that's mostly appealing. A lot of people like playing mysteries, but you don't have to limit it to solving crimes and that kind of thing. You can change the word mystery for quest and make it into more of an action adventure. And the final term we need to get to is the scene. The scene is the unit of the mystery where something important happens. The first scene will be the scene of the crime, which the players have to investigate and find clues. There might be a scene where they interrogate a suspect, and at the end there might be a scene where they find the resolution and confront the culprit. Scenes vary in length depending on how much there is to do in each of them, and how much your players interact with them. They could be as short as 5 minutes, you go in, you get what you need, you get out again, or they could stretch a lot longer than that. Most scenes go for about 10 to 15 minutes, which is why I suggest your session times are at least that length. Saying that, you can have a scene stretch over multiple sessions, you just might lose a bit of continuity in the time between. The mystery progresses from scene to scene. You can skip out all of the boring stuff in between, like getting food and travelling from one place to the next. You just start the scene where it's interesting, and you end it once all of the things have been resolved. A scene typically starts with the GM describing the situation, the physical environment and the people there. The players then have the opportunity to take some actions and interact with the scene. This is completely up to them. They can go and investigate something, they can talk to someone, or they can get in a fight if that's what's needed. And then those actions are resolved by the roll of a dice, which we'll get to very shortly, and the outcomes are assimilated into the scene. Then if there's more to do in the scene, the players take more actions, which are resolved. And once everybody decides that, yeah, we're done here, let's move on, we end the scene, go to the next one. I hope you're following so far. Now I'm going to give an example to really illustrate it. Let's say the players are searching for someone who's gone missing. They want to go and investigate their office. So they say, we want to go to the office. That's the start of a scene. Now the scene should start at the first most interesting thing. If the door is locked, the players are going to have to find a way in. If it's not locked, in our case, they can just walk in, and that's where the scene starts. So the GM is going to describe the situation. And the GM might say, and I'm going to read from my notes here, that it's a simple office with a large desk of drawers. It smells of printer ink and coffee. There's a modern computer on the desk. In the corner, there's a filing cabinet, and there are 2 chairs in the room. In a later video, I'll go into more detail about how to set the scene and the notes that you need, but in short, you keep it simple and brief. Pictures are a fantastic way of giving more information, but I also like to say it out loud so the students practice their listening skills. Anyway, the players have a general idea of what the office looks like and some things that they can start to interact with. One of the characters is called Annie. That's the character's name, not the student or the player's name, but to save things from getting confused, I'm just going to call them Annie, whether they're the player or the character in the game. Just remember that Annie is being controlled by one of the students. Now Annie thinks the filing cabinet is a good place to start. So she says to the GM, I go over to the filing cabinet and I open it. Now unfortunately for her, the filing cabinet is locked and she doesn't have a key. The GM tells her this. They say, you can't open the filing cabinet because it's locked. Do you have a key? And then she probably says she doesn't, so she opts for something else. In this case, she's going to try force. Annie says, I want to pull really hard on the filing cabinet and just break the lock. Okay, now this is something that's not easy to do. Just wrenching open a filing cabinet is not something anyone could do all of the time. It is a challenge, and there is a chance of failure. So this is where we need to determine whether she succeeds or she fails. And now we come to the most fundamental game rule of all, which is resolving challenging situations. And we're going to do this with some dice. The GM says to Annie, that's quite a difficult thing to do. I'm going to need you to roll for that. For this game, we're using 6-sided dice, like all of the dice you've ever seen before. Some role-playing games have loads of these polyhedral things, but we're keeping it simple, and if you want, you can go online and roll digitally. Annie rolls the die. If she gets a 5 or a 6, she succeeds. Hooray! If she gets a 4 or lower, she fails. Oh no. She rolls a 5. Hooray! She opens up the filing cabinet and finds a load of important documents. Great, now the GM can tell her about the clues that she finds in the documents. You might give her a piece of paper that she can read. All of that helps solve the mystery and advance the story. Next up, Annie wants to search through the desk drawers. There might be something hidden, and therefore there's a chance that she won't spot it. So again, there's a challenge, there's a chance of failure. She rolls another die. She gets a 5, hooray! She finds a hidden key in a compartment at the back. We don't know what the key is for yet, but it might help advance the mystery. So far so good for Annie and the gang. But what if she fails? And here is where the GM can decide some consequences of failure. Consequences are super important because there has to be some risk, some danger involved. That means students don't just do everything straight away. For example, not finding the secret key means she doesn't have that clue. And if she was in a rush, then it takes her a lot of time, or if she's trying to do it on the sly, then someone walks in and catches her. And if she failed at opening the filing cabinet, maybe it falls on her and does some injury. I'd say getting hurt trying to open a filing cabinet is a bit harsh, but you always have the option of consequences. That being said, you don't always have to add a consequence. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. In general, the riskier the action, the more likely a bad consequence. For example, if they're jumping across a 5-meter gap, a failure means you're going to fall down the hole. So the GM describes the new situation after the failure, just like they did with the success, and now there's a new scenario which players have to resolve. If she got hurt by the filing cabinet falling on her, what are they going to do? Is she so badly hurt she can't carry on? Do they need to take her to the hospital? Or do they just get up and keep investigating? So players can get physically hurt, they can get frustrated, and they can get frightened. And we're going to track all these with something called stress points. Each time something bad happens to a character, this can be physical, mental, emotional, anytime that happens they get 1 stress point. And if they get to 3 stress points, they're considered stressed out. That means they're essentially unable to do challenging things. They can't roll the dice to do something that's difficult. In more violent games, this might mean they go unconscious or even die. That's not the vibe we're going for in this game. They're just out of action until they can recover. We don't want to give stress points for every failed roll. They should only be for really serious things. Falling out of a tree and breaking your arm, getting absolutely yelled at by your parents, or losing all of the data on your phone. And you can tell the players before they do a particularly risky action that there might be a consequence of a stress point if they fail. We'll get back to stress points and how you can heal them a bit later. The point is there's risk and reward with these challenging actions, and they're determined quite randomly. And this isn't totally fair, is it? If it's completely down to luck, with the system that only a 5 or a 6 succeed and 1 to 4 is a failure, how will players ever get anything done? This is where we add some nuance to the rules. Players have different ways of increasing their chances, and all of them involve rolling more dice, or if you've only got 1 die, then you just roll it multiple times. The first way is to get help. Annie is part of a group. Even if you're playing with a 1-to-1 student, you will add in an extra player for them to go around as like a sidekick. So there's always somebody around who can help. Sure, the other players might be doing other actions, but it's possible that they haven't decided what they're doing yet, or they stop their action and come over to help. Annie is with another character called Mo. He can help her. Either he declares that he's going to help her, or she can ask him to come over to help. However that works in the conversation doesn't really matter. As long as both of them agree, as long as Mo agrees that he's helping, and he can physically help within the boundaries of the game, then it's fine. Helping is great. It means the player doing the action rolls an extra die. They only need to get 1 5 or 1 6 across all the dice that they roll to succeed, so with 2 dice, she's got a much better chance. However, there are some limitations. Mo has to be physically present, and he has to be able to help. If he's stressed out or if he's doing something else that's quite intensive, then he can't help. Secondly, only 1 player can help at one time. So if you have a group of 5, 1 player doing the action, all 4 of the others can't help and add extra dice. Third, help has to be declared before any dice are rolled. If Annie rolls 1 die and fails, she can't suddenly turn around and say, "Hey, Mo, come over here and help me," and then roll another die. No, it has to be done before she rolls anything. The final thing is if Annie fails and suffers a consequence, then Mo also suffers that consequence because he was helping. But helping isn't the only way of improving your chances. You can also use an item. If Annie happens to have a crowbar with her, it'll help her a lot in getting that filing cabinet open. As long as the character has the item and can explain reasonably how they're going to use it, then they add 1 extra die to their rolls. So if Annie gets out her crowbar and Mo decides to help, then Annie's going to roll 3 dice. She only needs a 5 or a 6 on 1 of them, so she's got really good chances of success. The third main way of getting more dice to your rolls is your character being skilled at something. How do we know if they're skilled at something? Aha! That's where we need a character sheet. A character sheet holds all the important information about a character, and all characters are different. Let's look at Annie's. Over here we've got her name and some basic info and description. That's all nice for flavour and roleplay, and we'll get back to that, but for now we're going to focus on the right hand side. A quick aside, this is the prototype character sheet, so it might change, and I'm not a great graphics designer, so apologies for the slightly basic presentation. These 10 words are character skills. They describe what a character is good at and what they're not so good at. Every time a character does an action that's challenging, they will use a certain skill. So opening a filing cabinet this way requires force, which is our top skill. Notice Annie has a single box shaded in. This means she just rolls one die as a standard for force actions. She doesn't get any extra ones. She's not very good at force. She's very good at charming people though, and quite good at a few other skills. We'll go over the skills in detail in the next video. So the charm skill, she has 3, indicated by the one square shaded in that everyone has on the left, and then the 2 extra boxes coloured in grey. So if she was trying to charm someone, convince them to tell her the truth or lie about something, she'd roll 3 dice on her own, and that's before any help or items. With skills, player characters are distinct from each other. They have different abilities. So a player with high computing skill would go over to the computer and try and hack that because they're a lot better at those things. Someone who's good at investigate might rifle through the drawers to find that hidden key. In a team, players can organise themselves and work together to maximise their chances. Let's have a look at Mo's character sheet. He's a strong lad. He has a skill of 3 in force, so he would roll 3 dice without any help or any items. That means he naturally has a much better chance of opening the filing cabinet than Annie. So in the game, Annie wants to open the filing cabinet, but she sees that she's not very strong, whereas Mo is. So instead of her taking the lead, she's going to get Mo to be the person doing the force. So Mo's 3 dice from the force are great, and Annie can help, and she can hand over the crowbar, each of which give an extra die. So now Mo is rolling 5 dice to try and get this filing cabinet open. And I mean, you're almost guaranteed to get it open at that point. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Let's take a step back and see what's happened in the point of view of a class. So Annie's player has wanted to try to do something. She's had a dialogue with the GM to see if it's possible, and she's realised that her teammate is much better, so she talks to him, and there might be a bit of role play going on there, and then Mo comes over and does the thing and they get what they need. All of that is done by dialogue and the roll of a few dice. This is a really cool thing, and it's worked so many times brilliantly in my classes, students working together and problem solving while using their English. If you're as excited about this as I am, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button on this video. It helps it spread to a bunch of other teachers and means I can create more content like this. Thank you very much. We've covered the basics of rolling to resolve challenging situations. Fantastic. Now we're going to talk about a couple of rules that will only apply in certain situations. The first is about players doing really challenging actions. Let's say a player wants to lift up a car. They've got 3 force and an item and maybe a buddy helping them do it, so that's a really good chance of them doing the superhuman feat of strength, which maybe you don't really want. Unless you're playing a game where they're superheroes, lifting up a car should be a lot more difficult than trying to break open a filing cabinet. You have 2 options here as a GM. The first is just say that's way too difficult and you can't do it. I don't really like that, but with some things it's just physically impossible, so rolling for it is pointless. It's just not going to succeed. But if it is something that there's an outside chance of somebody being able to do it, then instead of them needing 1 success, either a 5 or a 6, they need 2 successes, or even 3 successes. So even if they're rolling 5 dice, it's a lot harder for them to succeed. But not impossible, and I like to always let my students try. Increasing the number of successes required in the roll should only be for extreme cases though, don't do it too often. Most of the time players will have a good idea of what they can do and what they can't do and what is really risky. In the video after this one, I'm going to talk about managing player expectations so these situations don't come up very often. Another issue, especially with younger and new players, is the desire to want to roll again when they fail. Failure can be frustrating, but it is vital for a good game. The general rule is you can't re-roll after failing something. If you could, then what is the point in rolling? If you just keep rolling until you get a success, then we're not playing a game anymore. Also, I avoid the kind of pile-on thing where everybody decides they want to have a go until one of them succeeds. If you've got a group of 4 students and they all have a roll for it, it's pretty likely one of them will get a success. And for me, that's a bit lame. You just want one roll, and if it succeeds, it succeeds. If it fails, it fails. But there are some cases where you might want to let players re-roll. Instead of getting frustrated about their failure, you can guide students to a different route to get what they need. And some cases this will involve a re-roll, but after they've done something different. They've tried a new approach. So let's say Annie tried to yank the filing cabinet open and she failed. What does she do now? Forget about it? Or does she get creative and find some other way of getting inside? She realizes that one of her teammates has a blowtorch. She asks the teammate to come over and they use the blowtorch to melt the metal around the filing cabinet so that they can break the lock and get the documents. That is a completely different approach and it's quite creative, so it definitely warrants a reroll. They have absolutely earned that. But it's not always possible to come up with a creative different approach. So you might want them to re-roll again, just make it more difficult by requiring 2 successes. Again, I'll go into this in more detail in the next video about being a GM teacher. For now, let's carry on with some rules. Because there is one fantastic way that players can get a re-roll, and that is with inspiration. When I came up with the inspiration rule, I was super excited to see it in practice. It mechanically encourages teamwork. So when I tried it out in my hobby group, it went brilliantly. There was loads of interactions where one player would help out another, save them from a dangerous situation. It all just works fantastically for collaborative play. We know that when a player rolls a 5 or a 6, they succeed in the action they're trying to do. But 5s and 6s are not equal. A 5 is just a normal success. But a 6 is a success with inspiration. That means the player gets an inspiration token. They can only have one of these at a time, and they keep it in front of them or make a mark on their character sheet. So we know how to get them, great. What are they for? They're for giving other players re-rolls. In a similar way to helping another character, the player giving the inspiration point needs to be present and able to do stuff. You can describe this narratively however you like depending on the situation. Let's give an example back to the office. Mo is trying to hack the computer. He plugs in his phone and there's an app that goes on it that tries to filter through all of the documents and get the important ones out. But he fails his compute roll and things are looking bad. That app has gone wrong and it looks like it's going to wipe all the data from the computer and his phone. That is really not a good situation for Mo. Annie sees things going very badly and she decides to cash in her inspiration point. This means Mo can roll again, the same number of dice that he did for the initial roll. So he rolls again and he gets a success. The day is saved. And you can narrate this with a bit of roleplay as Annie rushes over and yanks the cable out just before the bad things happen and everything gets wiped. They then figure out that there's a rogue program and they edit it, they change the coding, they plug it back in and get the results that they want. I love this because characters who are not active in the moment get to save the day and you get all of these interactions that bring people together. There is no guarantee that the second roll will succeed. Mo gets the inspiration, re-rolls. What if he fails? He suffers the consequence, and unfortunately, Annie also suffers the consequence. That is, if there is a consequence that could be reasonably applied to Annie. For Mo, the consequence might be a stress point from his phone data getting wiped, but for Annie, her phone's still fine, so maybe she doesn't take the stress point there. There are no limits to how many inspiration points can be spent on a single action. If Annie spent hers to help Mo get a reroll and he failed, maybe another character comes in and saves the day at the last moment, spending another inspiration point. However, depending on how playtesting goes, I am considering adding a rule that each extra inspiration point that is spent removes 1 die from the original roll. Otherwise they'll be a bit too powerful. But like I said, that's something I'll test out with a bunch of different groups who play all differently, and in a future video I'll update you on those kind of things. And inspiration points don't stop there. Each time someone spends one, it goes toward a shared progression. Think of this like XP or house points in a classroom, but everybody has one together. In a physical classroom, I'll use tokens, and when a player gets their inspiration from rolling a 6, I give them a token, and when they spend it, they give it back to me and it goes in a pot of shared tokens. And at the end of each mystery, we'll count up how many tokens there are and add all of them to the shared progression. And as they advance up the progression, getting more and more points, they will unlock new abilities, which most of them are going to be different team powers to make them work even better together. In the last video, I mentioned a mechanic for rewarding the use of certain language, and the rewards will also go into this progression chart. That whole system though of the words rewarding things is for another video entirely. We have in this video covered all of the core rules, and at their heart they're pretty simple, at least compared to most role-playing games. The main takeaways are the GM describes and referees the world, while the players control their characters who interact with it. The outcome of challenging situations is determined by the roll of a dice. 5 or 6 is a success, 1 to 4 is a fail. Players can boost their chances by rolling more dice, by getting help or items, or using their character skills. And inspiration points get given on the roll of a 6 and can be used to give other players re-rolls. The next stage of this process is to give you some guidance on how you, as a potentially new GM teacher, can introduce the game with new and young players so that it works really well. It can seem a little intimidating at first, but really it's super easy and a lot of fun once you get into the swing of it. So that will be in the next video, in which we'll also look at the character sheet, like what the skills are for and what this drive and problem mean. So you can find that next video right here, or if I haven't made it quite yet, then right here is a lovely game you can try in your classroom that will be fantastic. But for now, I've been Will from Enchanted ESL, wishing you all the joy and success in your teaching. See ya!